It's the Notch 6 online podcast, episode number 8. This month I'm with John Schmid, president of Project Roar Publishing. We talk about an amazing stack of papers that John purchased that ended up turning into 3 incredibly successful books about post-war Lionel trains. Very informative episode. I'll also talk about me building my first Corber kit, my thoughts on York, and so much more. It's all ahead on Notch 6.
This is the Notch 6 online podcast. Notch 6 is the podcast dedicated to O-gauge trains. Whether you're collecting, operating, or just getting started, Notch 6 is your home for O-gauge news, events, and interviews. Now here is your host, Derek Thomas.
Well, welcome back for episode number 8 of Notch 6, the only show dedicated to O-gauge trains. Whether you're new to the hobby, whether you run a carpet central railroad that takes up your living room, or whether you've had to add on to the house just to hold all the trains, Notch 6 is your only show that's dedicated to O-gauge trains, and man, we're happy to do it. Boy, it feels like it's been a while since I've sat down and done one of these. In reality, it's been 2 months since we've had a full quote-unquote episode, but it feels like it's been a lot longer than that. I hope everybody enjoyed the York coverage from last month. I really enjoyed it myself. It was great to get out there and see everybody. Thank you so much to all the people who stopped by and said hi to me in the Orange Hall and the other halls. I didn't make it much past the Orange Hall due to all the interviews and running around and talking to different people, so the bulk of my 2 days was spent in the Orange Hall interviewing people. But for those of you who did stop and say hello, it was so nice to see everybody, and thanks for the great words of encouragement. We'll talk a little bit more about my York impressions in the news section. And something I want to mention real quick is there is more footage from the York meet that I haven't released yet. Honestly, trying to find time to edit it has been a challenge, but I have a full seminar from Lionel that explains all of the Lion Chief and LCS upcoming items. So I have their full seminar, and then I also have the DCS intro seminar from the MTH booth. Really, it's just a matter of getting time to edit those, and so that's coming. It's just going to take me a little bit of time to sit down and edit them. So hopefully we'll have some more bonus York footage for you guys between now and hopefully before Christmas. All right, so much to talk about. Let's hop over to the news desk and get things started.
Keeping you up to date on everything that's coming down the tracks in the world of O-gauge. It's time for the Notch 6 News Desk. The News Desk is brought to you by the Lionel Collectors Club of America. Visit lionelcollectors.org for all the latest LCCA news.
Well, it's 30 days past York, and now I think everybody's kind of had some time to digest everything that was new and announced at York. Nothing too revolutionary that hadn't already been hinted at, I guess you could say. The big one, obviously, Lionel's Vision Line Big Boy with the depleting coal load, and I think you guys got all the news that you can handle on that from the segments last month. Here are the things that I took away from York this time. Number one, the big one, is the idea of starting to combine our trains with more technology, especially technology that already exists in the marketplace outside of the O-gauge world. Specifically, the apps that Lionel and MTH are both developing. And Andy Edelman and I spent some time talking about this. If you listened to the show from last month with the MTH York news, Andy and I spent a few minutes talking about this. But this really is, in my opinion, one of the important keys to opening up the hobby to a broader audience. And really, I think it's our job as ambassadors of the hobby to at least look at this technology and recognize how this technology can open up an outside world to people who may have never held a DCS remote, a legacy remote, anything like that. But with these apps that are coming for the iPhone and the Android, and I think you're going to see them from both camps, both Lionel and MTH, I think it's easier to show somebody an iPad or an iPhone and say, okay, does this make sense to you? As opposed to handing them a legacy remote or a DCS remote and saying, well, you press this, and this to make the train go. I'd much rather hand them an iPhone or an iPad. And that's, I think, one of the big reasons that the time and the effort is being spent to develop these apps. And so actually seeing the apps at York and watching people play with them, it was neat to see how people reacted. And there's definitely a segment of the hobby that is interested in this kind of technology becoming a part of the trains. Obviously, I think it's geared towards younger guys like myself, but I think if people will give this stuff a chance, that they'll realize that it's not such a bad thing. The other neat thing that I saw at York, and what really blew me away, was the request for specific information on S-Gauge. It really seems like there's a resurgence coming in S-Gauge, especially with the effort that Lionel and MTH are both putting into their respective S-Gauge product lines. I think there are some very good things on the horizon for a market that I'm sure you guys have felt pretty ignored for a while. And the reality is the S-Gauge market has never gone away, but especially in the American Flyer line, you guys have kind of been the redheaded stepchild that everybody has kind of ignored, and it seems like they threw you a few bones every so often to keep you guys happy. But I think people are really starting to look at S-Gauge as a viable market again, and especially with all these neat things coming out for you guys. I'm excited to watch. I'm excited for you guys. It's neat to see the technology start to trickle down to these S-Gauge trains, and there really are some cool things on the horizon. So excited for the S-Gaugers. Thanks for the kind words, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the little S-Gauge news segment. I will try to keep up on that and keep you guys in the loop on that. Other things I want to talk about back home, specifically on my layout, this was an interesting month for me as I attempted to build my first Korber models kit. Now, I've been fascinated with Korber kits for a long time, but really never felt compelled to try and build one myself. But as I kind of progressed down this, pipeline of my modeling skills increasing, I finally said, you know what? I want to build a Korber kit. So I picked up a sealed example of the JLC factory kit from Korber. That kit is, almost 17 years old now. And so, and Korber does offer it as a re-released kit, so you can go to the Korber website and pick up this kit new. But I finally tried my hand at building a Korber kit, and I tell you what, I was really surprised how easy it was. When you open the box, it's a little overwhelming because there's all these walls and parts and things, and you're just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to figure this all out? But with some patience and following the instructions, it really wasn't that bad. And if you take the time to detail and paint it before you try and glue it all together, it makes all the difference in the world. But you end up with a really great looking building for not a ton of money when you consider the level of details. Now, one of the things I found out, and hopefully this trick will help some of you guys out, is especially on the older sealed Korber kits, and I know there are Korber kits that haven't been re-released yet. So if you buy a sealed Korber kit that's, more than a decade or so old, there's a possibility that there are some warped resin parts in there. One of the tricks I learned, especially with the large wall sections, and don't do this with your wife at home or anybody that is going to get offended by you using the oven. But one of the things I learned is that you can set the oven on a very, very low setting. I think I had mine on 250. And if you put the walls on an old cookie sheet and lay them flat and heat them up for about 3 minutes in the oven at around 250, those walls start to get pliable again. And then while the walls are still hot, you can press them between two boards or something that'll flatten those out. And those will help the walls go back flat and close to their original shape. And so for those of you who have those old Korber kits sitting around in the closet that are collecting dust that you haven't done anything with and have no idea how you're going to deal with the warped walls, that's how you do it. And so that was the trick I learned. But overall, I'm just really happy with the way the Korber kit turned out. There's a photo of it on our Facebook page. And I would encourage you, if you're looking to get into more detailed modeling, I know that those kits look very challenging, but I tell you what, mine went together, I would say, in under 4 hours. Now, I still have a few detailing items to do, but for the most part, the kit is set up, it's on the layout, and it looks great. So I encourage you, if you're looking to do new modeling items, check out the stuff from Korber. And it's hard to believe, but it is the holiday season. At least it is in my world, although Thanksgiving is the official kickoff. So many cool train-related events to talk about. I'm just going to take a few moments and highlight a few of them. First off, the Lionel layout at Grand Central Terminal is back again for another year. Roger and the TW Trainworks team just put the finishing touches on installing this layout in the past week. That opens pretty quick here in November, I think right around Thanksgiving. Another great Trainworks event that they're involved in is the Trains in North Park at Dallas. That event will run from November 23rd to January 5th. Let's see what else is going on. The NJ High Railers, or the New Jersey High Railers, has open houses on November 17th, December 5th, and December 22nd. For more information on those open houses, check out njhighrailers.com. The Nassau Lionel Operating Engineers has open houses in December as well on December 6th, December 7th, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. For more information on their open houses, check out nloe.org. And finally, last but not least, the Lionel Collectors Club of America is back in Leland, Iowa on December 14th. And for more information on that event, check out lionelcollectors.org. Now, I know there's tons of events going on around the country. Be sure to check out the O-Gauge Railroading Online Forum and see what's going on in your area. There's always things going on. Just have to look around a little bit, especially this time of year. All right, that'll do it for the news section, and now it's time to jump into our feature interview for this month. This month, I'm talking with John Schmid, the president of Project Roar. You may be familiar with his work if you are a fan of post-war. John has compiled some of the most fascinating post-war history from Lionel service documents and has put together 3 really outstanding books along with his fellow post-war collectors. Those 3 books are The Authoritative Guide to Lionel Promotional Sets 1960 through 1969, The Authoritative Guide to Lionel Post-War Operating Cars, and John was also a contributor to Bob Osterhoff's book, Inside the Lionel Fun Factory, which is an amazing read and will tell you more details than you ever thought possible about the Lionel factories and the manufacturing process and the history of those factories. There's lots of great information here, especially if you're a fan of post-war, and there's some really, really fascinating stories that need to be told about how this all came together. You guys are going to love this interview. Sit back and relax. Let's put it in Notch 6.
This is the Notch 6 online podcast, your home for O-Gauge news, events, and interviews. Here again is Derek Thomas.
Welcome back to Notch 6, and for you post-war fans, I have a great interview for you today. I'm with John Schmid, president of Project Roar Publishing, and an avid Lionel collector for many, many years, but we'll get into that in a few minutes. John, thanks for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hey, Derek, it's also a pleasure to be here, and, you know, anytime I can take some time out of my day and talk trains, it's a great day, so.
The first question I ask every guest on this show is, tell me how you got involved with the hobby of toy trains. What's your background?
You know, I'm kind of second generation. I was kind of born into it. My dad was or still is a huge Lionel post-war collector, and you know, I knew nothing else. I mean, when I was a kid, there was always trains around the tree. You know, I was born in '64, so I got the tail end of post-war, and you know, I lived the NPC era and everything, and they were just always there. So I did the traditional type of thing too, where you know, I was into trains. I went to school, came out of school, got married. You know, didn't really pay much attention to trains, and then kind of back into my mid-30s is when I really started getting into it again. And what we'll talk about here a little bit later today is, you know, when I really started getting crazy was after we acquired some internal Lionel production documents. The short answer is I guess I had no choice.
Now, is there a story of how your dad got involved in the hobby? Did that go back to his childhood?
Yeah, you know, his dad had you know, some pre-war trains and stuff, and you know, my dad was an accountant, and there was a hobby store. He stopped by one day after work, and they had a Canadian Pacific set on display. So that's, you know, what, 57, 58 era, you know, depending on if it was leftover production. He ended up buying a CP set, and that's kind of what got him hooked on trains again.
So in reality, you would be the third generation that has had toy trains in the family, and obviously it's something that's still very important to you guys. As you've collected over the years, what segments of the hobby have kind of caught your interest, and where have you focused your collection as you've evolved in the hobby?
Yeah, I think, by default I kind of picked up where my dad's interest, which was the post-war era, which is, it's some of the most beautiful and well-made trains ever. And then if you had a sub-segment into there, I love the F3s, and when we started doing what we're talking about a little bit later here is the promotional outfits. I'm really big into outfits, and another segment I'm big into is paperwork, which we'll talk about. My dad also got into recently the Lionel HO and Lionel Raceway. So, I think we're obsessive collectors at heart, and the good news is Lionel made so much stuff. There's never end, so you can keep going.
With all the pieces that Lionel has made, and obviously between you and your dad, you guys have amassed quite a collection over the years. What are the pieces that stick out to you as your favorite?
It's kind of weird. It's like, it's like being a dad. You really don't really have a favorite kid, but if you're going to push me on it, we addressed a lot of this in our book, Inside the Lionel Train Fun Factory, that we published, and a lot of what we talked about in the promotional outfit book that we did was the trains are kind of a conduit for a relationship between a father and a son, and I think that's kind of the heartstrings that Joshua Lionel Cowan pulled on and marketed to when he was building the company. And so I think emotionally and also collector-wise, my dad's and my favorite pieces, we actually have a father-son train outfit that Lionel came out with in 1960. That's the one where they have the matching O-gauge and HO outfit, kind of an over and under type of, the O-gauge ran on top and the HO ran underneath, and all the items matched. Very difficult outfit to find complete, and that's probably our prized possession. Also, some of my favorite things is just I'm insane for the history and the paperwork. We have we'll talk a little bit about the paperwork that we acquired from the Kughn collection back in early 2000, but anything to do with paperwork, it's almost like a drug to me. If I see any paperwork on eBay, it's like I get all excited and things get crazy. And probably the other thing I'm into is it's those orange boxes. Anything post-war mint, even a bumper, 260 bumper. It just gets me excited if it's brand new in the box, because you feel like a kid again opening it up for the first time. So. Once again, that gets back to your first question. I'm kind of an obsessive collector, so it's hard to segment it down and pick a favorite.
I completely understand about what you're saying about, the mint boxes, because there is just a feel and a look to them when the flaps are crisp and there's no creasing, and it's something that it's such a different feel, and I think that resonates with a lot of people, that have ever opened a mint piece. There's something about demintifying a piece that not a lot of people get a chance to do, and I understand why a lot of people gravitate towards that, and there clearly are a lot of post-war collectors that appreciate that end of it. And then kind of talking about the paperwork as well, and maybe you're like I am, but there's something fascinating about studying those documents that were so critical to making the company function. If we're talking about paperwork, it's thinking about, okay, to them this was a job, but when you study and you trace the history, you kind of have to be a junkie to like the paperwork. Am I right?
Yeah, and it was an interesting journey. I mean, I got by degree I have an engineering background. I'm a pretty technical, analytical person, and I love history. And my father owned a manufacturing company for numerous years. So you start pulling all that together, and you look at the when people start getting into the variations and all the crazy stuff that Lionel did. It's kind of a perfect storm of just taking collecting to the next level. And like I said, there was just some stuff on eBay the other day for some production documents, and to me, it's a big puzzle trying to pull everything back together. And unfortunately, a lot of the old timers have moved on, but I did get a chance to talk to a few of them when I was writing my books, and it was interesting how their perspective on how things went down at the company. So,
talking with former Lionel employees, what's their kind of take on what the hobby has become in terms of what's their feeling about, here's this guy who's writing a book about what we did for a job every day. What was their take on that?
Well, it still is a large organization. So I mean, you get different opinions across the board. But I think probably one of the best stories I ever came across was when Joe Agazzini and I were working on Authoritative Guide to Lionel's Post-War Operating Cars. We went and met with Tom Pagano, whose father worked there, and he worked there until 1959 with a big flushing of employees. He at the time, in the mid-50s, he was actually running the manufacturing of the production line for individual items. And Joe Agazzini brought an operating car to him, and he said, "Look, in the third panel, there's a nick in the roof." So he gives it to Tom Pagano. Tom Pagano's in his late 80s at the time. And he just takes this piece and he stares at the piece literally. We videotaped it. He's staring for this piece for like 3 to 5 minutes. He just totally checked out. And he asked one question. He said, "Well, how do you know when that happened?" When Joe Agazzini goes, "Well, I have a bunch from the year before and a bunch from the year after." But the whole thing was they were so into manufacturing. Look at all the great things that Lionel did. They did, powdered metals, they did plastics, they did electronics, they did everything. So if you were an engineer in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, what better place to work at than a company like Lionel? You got to do everything. And they just happened to be making trains. So the punchline to the story is Tom was upset that nick in that mold or that flaw in that train got past him. And he was still, we did this probably about 7 or 8 years ago. So he had been out of the company for 40, 50 years. He was still upset that was there. So that kind of gives you one perspective that they were just making a product that happened to be trains. Now, you talk to other people from the company, they loved trains. And, some of them think we're crazy for doing all these variations because we're just making trains. Other people think it's the greatest thing in the world. So, the opinions go across the board, but I think that Tom Pagano's story is a great perspective on guys like Joseph Bonanno and all the engineers there that really took pride in what they were doing.
Absolutely, and I think it's a cool story and an important story. And one of the neat things about doing a podcast like this or for a project where we're writing books is you're collecting a history. And I think the guys that are really watching, every year that passes, we're getting farther and farther away from the true post-war era.
I think that's one thing when we started writing these books and we did all these documents and stuff, and people are like going, "Come on, what else can you write about post-war? The stuff's been out for 50 years. There's nothing new. Everything's been written." And then, I came out with my Authoritative Guide to Lionel's Promotional Outfit book, and there's hundreds of things in there that just people didn't, know about that we documented. And I'm kind of responsible for creating a new wave of crazy people. And we'll get into that a little bit later on other things. I was talking to another collector this morning. He goes, "I have everything. I've got, one of every 64. I got one of this. And when my book came out, he goes, "John, this gave me a whole new rebirth of my collection because there's a bunch of things in here that nobody knew about. Now I can go find and try and collect," which is part of the joy of collecting.
Before we go down this pipeline, let's rewind to the very beginning to talk about how Project Roar got started. Tell me about this stack of papers that you and your father purchased and how you decided what you were going to do with them.
Yeah, it was, I can't remember, it was like 2000. It was, Dick Kughn had, sold his share in Lionel and was moving on to a little bit later in his life, and he was thinning out some of his collection, and he had a big auction through Stout Auctions in Indiana. We were selling a 2-day auction, selling some of his stuff off. My dad had just retired. This catalog comes in the mail. I look at it, I'm like, "This is cool stuff." So my dad and I went down there and said, let's go check this thing out. And unbeknownst to me, there was about 3-foot high stack of Lionel production records there. And I'll be the first to admit at that time, I was still kind of a novice in the industry. In collecting. I knew about post-war, and I had a fairly decent, collection, but I was no smarter than the average Joe in post-war. And all of a sudden, this lot comes up at the auction, and all of a sudden, Greg Stout's pointing at me. I'm like, well, I'm not bidding on this stuff. Well, I didn't know. My dad's sitting next to me bidding on this stuff. So he bought these records. I remember driving home from the auction with them in the trunk of the car, having visions of the trunk popping open of the car and these records scattering all over the highway. I was freaking out. So we get home and we start looking at how what these things were, and I'm like going, holy cow, these are like the holy grail of production records. They contained all of the production records for the Lionel cataloged, uncatalogued, Raceway, HO, and Science, anything that basically came in a box in the 1960s for Lionel trains. So they were the promotional outfits were probably the best part of it, because those outfits were the ones that never actually showed up in a catalog. So once Lionel produced those outfits, it was unknown the exact contents. And at that time, late 90s, early 2000 on eBay, there was empty boxes all over the place that people had no idea what they went into. So we started looking at this stuff and saying, instead of doing at the end of the movie, The Raiders of the Lost Ark, I don't know if you remember, they take the Ark, after they go and find it and everything, they box it up and they stick it in this huge warehouse, never to be seen again, right? We didn't want to do that. We didn't want to take these records and just stick them in our basement, never to be seen again. We were like, the hobby's been so good to us. We've met so many great people. Why don't we give back? Why don't we figure out how to publish these or get these back into people's hands, this information? So I wrote a little business plan. I went to a couple other people who've been known to do books out there, and everybody just said no. I said, well, how difficult can it be? I'll just start my own team and publish these things. And that's kind of the genesis of Project Roar. Roar, hence the lion from Lionel, a lion roars. And Project it was a project. So my dad came up with the name Project Roar, and we started the company and went from there. So that's kind of how it came about, innocently. And we'll talk a little bit more where it's gotten to, but that was it.
You're listening to the Notch 6 podcast, and I'm talking with John Schmid, president of Project Roar Publishing. John, you obviously realized very quickly how special these papers were. As you worked through the stack, what were some of the most exciting things that you were able to tease out of these factory notes?
Actually, I had to step back a little bit. I wasn't on a scale of 1 to 10. I think I mentioned I was probably about a 5 of my knowledge of post-war trains. So before I could even realize, I couldn't even read these things. There was suffix, and I'll get into a little bit more about the suffixes and all the crazy stuff in there, because these were internal production records. They weren't for consumer, viewing. So I actually sat down and read every Greenberg book out there. I read all kinds of stuff out there, and then I said, I have to build a team of experts. There's no way I could publish these books on my own. So, between my father, Roger Karp, Al Gazzini, Manny Piazza, Bob Osterhoff, Paul Amp, I went and built the dream team of the top guys out there to figure out, what these things actually meant. And there's a gentleman named Todd Wagner who used to work at Lionel. He helped me, read these things and understand what the codes were and stuff like that. So once I started to get to know the documents a little bit better, and we started working with them, like Joe Algazzini and I were taking pictures of promotional outfits and doing stuff, that's when the nuggets started to pull out. So some of the things we actually gleaned that were just, they may sound trivial in life, but from a collecting perspective, they were like unbelievable. One thing was Lionel had numbers for everything, and they had suffixes for everything. And suffixes started going crazy. They've been going crazy since day one, but they started getting a little bit crazier in 1956 when Lionel started putting items in boxes, outfit boxes, unboxed. So they were starting to cheapening some of the packing sheet. So what they started doing was they had different suffixes whether an item was boxed or unboxed. Well, that carried over all the way into, I know at least for 69, it may have carried over to today. So one thing we found out was it was common knowledge or common belief that a 6464 725, which is the orange New Haven boxcar, the box always said -735. And you read any Greenberg book or whatever, think, that box is wrong, that Lionel made a mistake. Well, believe it or not, Lionel didn't make a mistake. When it came boxed, it was a -735. When it came unboxed, it was a different suffix. So they had different suffixes for whether an item was boxed or unboxed. When Joe Algazzini found that out, he went crazy. He just went back and he had a bunch of, in the service station manual, they mentioned a lot of these suffixes. For years, people have been looking for these boxes, and it wasn't the box. It just meant that the item was unboxed. That was kind of cool. We figured that out. They made 9 different submarine base outfits. Submarine base was the atomic submarine base. It was a huge cardboard cutout that they put in outfits to enhance the play value. There was 9 different outfits. So, kind of mentioned before how I sparked a creation of a bunch of additional crazy collectors out there. There's guys out there right now who are just trying to collect all of those 9 sub-base outfits. So, just some crazy stuff that came out of doing the research that has driven a whole new re-energization of the hobby.
That's the neat thing about post-war collecting, because I'm sure there's listeners that have never even heard of the atomic sub-base, and if you almost have to be a relatively well-seasoned post-war collector to have heard of this cardboard sub-base. But man, if you ever find one, it's amazing. You're sitting on something that, it's crazy when you tell people, and especially people outside the hobby, you show somebody a picture of a submarine base and you tell them, oh yeah, by the way, this piece of cardboard, if it's in the box with the instruction sheet, you're sitting on anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000.
Yeah, and the cool thing about it, since I documented it, a lot of those that would have, and I'd like to think this, a lot of those that would have gotten thrown away showed up on eBay, and collectors now know what they are, have purchased them and saved them. So in a weird way of, trying to preserve the hobby, I think I've done some things to try and help out there. So
tell me about the actual writing of your first book, which is the authoritative guide to Lionel promotional outfits 1960 through 1969, which by most people in the post-war realm is kind of referred to as the go-to book for promotional outfits. How did you make sense of all the internal orders and turn it into something that the average hobbyist could use?
Yeah, when we first started looking at the records, the book came out to be 848 pages, but there was hundreds and hundreds, I think I said a 3-foot stack high of records. One thought was just to take the records, scan them in, and, sell them as a book. But it was just like you said, it took me from start to finish about 5.5 years to, do the entire book. The first year or so was just deciphering and learning all this stuff. So, I didn't want to dump that on somebody else. So, kind of mentioned in the past, I worked with Todd Wagner, and I built a pretty strong team. And then I had a lot of people. Anybody I asked for help was just. So I had one collector. So one decision we made was, all right, we're gonna kind of restate the records to make them easier to read. Another thing my dad and I made a decision of was we're going to try and get as many photographs as possible of these outfits. So of the 700 so plus outfits, my goal was to get at least 300 pictures of them. So I had collectors, one collector, I came to his house, lived in Philadelphia. I came to his house on a Monday morning. He met me before he left from work. He took me to his 3rd floor collection. He said, here's everything, go at it, and then left for work. I spent 15 days straight there photographing his promotional outfits. Another collector, Joe Algazzini, I'd go there every day, and we'd spend all day long just photographing his promotional outfits. So, and in doing so, when you got to actually see the outfit compared to the records, that's when I started learning a lot more. So of my 848-page book, almost the first third of it is just discussing how Lionel did their suffixes, how Lionel numbered their boxes. There was certain outfits, like the Channel Master outfit, which was the X573NA, which was Lionel's number. There was 7 variations of that outfit, 6 different boxes. To understand the boxes, you had to understand how Lionel numbered the boxes. Lionel was the most anal retentive company in the world. So the boxes typically would have a sequence where it was year, dash part number. So in 1960, every outfit box would start with a 60, and then they would just start numbering sequentially from 100. So it started 60, 100, 60, 101, 60, 102. And like I said, there was 6 different outfit boxes, so there might be a 60, 463. They may have reused a 59 box, so it might have been a 59, 352. And the only way to tell those numbers was you actually had to pop the bottom flaps. So I had collectors who would let me pop the bottom flaps because that's where the numbers were the outfits were numbered. So I had to learn all the boxing. Inserts, all the inserts were numbered. Packets, all the packets were numbered. All the peripherals. So that's what took me so long. It wasn't as simple as just taking the records and throwing them out there. It was deciphering all these crazy suffixes and learning how to do all that. So that was the kind of the writing of the book. And then Roger Karp edits all my books from Classic Toy Trains. He just takes. I give him my text. It comes back beautiful. He's probably one of the greatest gifts to this hobby ever because there's a lot of guys who know trains real well and can kind of write. Roger makes all of us crazy train guys sound great. And then there's the physical production of the book, which Roger and a lot of the guys from Kallenbach helped me out there. Roger kind of walked me through and got me hooked up with people who could walk me through the whole physical production of the book. And then there's the whole business side of it too, the selling and marketing. And doing podcasts like this today helps sell the book, helps get the word out there. So that's kind of a long answer to your short question, but I'm still learning today. I still get, my personal copy of my book is sitting right here, and I've probably got about 100 pages of additional information that people have sent me over the years. That just additional information, different variations, different stuff that I didn't even catch when I was writing the book. So it's never ending.
Now, I want to go back. There's 2 things that you mentioned that I think are interesting. The first thing is very clearly Lionel had a method to their madness. From all of your research, we talk about, the sub-base sets having 9 variation, other sets having 6 or 7 variations. Can you kind of give I don't know if there's going to be a short answer to this, but what drove Lionel to create variations? Was it just, this is what we have on hand, we're changing packaging? Was there a method to what would create a different variation?
Well, you have to. Some of the stuff occurred in the 50s as well, but the 60s was a crazy time. In 1959, when they let a lot of the good people go. I mean, 60s was a great era, but a lot of the stuff that was going on there was in my opinion, this is my opinion, they overbuilt. They had just way too much overhead, and they were trying to cover the overhead with as much product as they could in a declining market. So they were open to anything. So Derek, if you said, hey, I wanted to do, a promotional outfit to support my, my Notch 6 podcast, they'd say, well, how many, And they were doing promotional outfits as low as quantities of 6.
Wow.
So they were doing anything. So there's 2 sides of the coin. My opinion was it's easy to sell when everybody's buying it. So in the 50s, when everybody was buying trains, you could be a star salesperson. You don't have to be too smart, You don't have to be the most creative person in the world and still be successful. In the 60s, I would be the contrarian view, that Lionel was being more and more creative with limited resources. So they were trying to do whatever they could to sell trains. Now, back to your original question, variations, they had 9 different sub-base outfits. So, when if I was a salesperson and I was going to Lit Brothers was a customer of theirs who bought sub-base outfits, I would probably come to them saying, hey, what's your price point? What's the promotion you're trying to do? Okay, you're trying to be different than, Macy's down the street. Okay, we'll do this. And, for $1 more, I can get you this huge cardboard thing. And a lot of the things they were doing back in the 60s was piece count. So this outfit had 150 different pieces. Well, a sub-base has, I think, off the top of my head, 12 different pieces. So boom, now I went from a 5-piece train set, 8 pieces of track, that's 13, add everything else now. I went from 20 pieces. Now I just added 12 more pieces. I'm up to 32 pieces now. So somebody comes and say, hey, it's a 32-piece train outfit versus the other one here. Macy's only got the 7. We got the 32. So there was a lot of that stuff going on as well. And then, here's a good example. In late 1963, they were just having a terrible year. They did about, I think, 10 million in sales in trains the year before. In 63, I think they did 6 off the top of my head. So Robert Wolf, who was in charge at the time, was just freaking out. What could he do? And so he went to Sears, who was, one of the biggest customers in the 60s, and said, hey, fire sale, what do you want? And he did a $400,000 plus deal with them, which is a huge percentage. If you're only doing $6 million, a year, you sell a $400,000 additional deal at the end of the year. And Derek, you look at some of those outfits, they were just, it's like they took a wheelbarrow and just dumped stuff in there. There's one outfit, a 19312. It has 2 diesels in it, 2 motorized units. It's got a turntable. It's got like the kitchen sink in there. So
wow,
that's how some of it was. The answer is yes, yes, yes. Whatever I could do to get the sale, and that's how. Now on the variations, like the Channel Master, the reason why I had 7 variations on that was a hugely successful promotion. So that worked as if you were a Channel Master customer. If you bought 10 radios, so like if you're a Channel Master dealer and you bought 10 radios, they would give you a free train set. And then as a dealer, you could do whatever you wanted with it. You could sell it to your clients, or you give it to your best clients, or do whatever you want. That one was so successful that, the original run, I think, of 4,500, they ran out. So they did a second run. They ran out. They did a third run. They ran out. And so they just kept dumping stuff in the outfits, as the demand. So some of it was the dump stuff. Other stuff was really successful. So that kind of led to, a lot of the variations and crazy stuff going on.
It's so neat to listen to you, and I can only imagine what it would have been like to have been a fly on the wall in the sales offices in the 60s, and I'm sure you've had that vision as well. But it's neat that here we are almost, 50-some years later, and we're still able to trace back this kind of history. And it's really pretty interesting from a collector standpoint, how many different factors played into how things were done at Lionel. And I think there's this idea that it was controlled chaos, but as I listen to you talk here, it really was, everything had a suffix, this was done for this reason, this was done for this reason, and sometimes it wasn't the best reasoning, but it was done for a reason. Yeah. I think that's really interesting. One of the other things that you had mentioned is you said you've got, in your personal copy of the book, tons of notes. Do you foresee a second printing of the book, a revised edition at some point?
I've talked about doing an addendum, but right now it's a hugely successful book for me, but I still got inventory, so if anybody on the podcast wants to help me, keep buying books. It's a real easy value equation. The more books you buy, the more I can write. So, yeah, I've talked about doing an addendum. In fact, Paul Ambrose just did an addendum to his cataloged outfit book. I helped him out. The 3-foot stack of stuff that we acquired had promotional outfits, cataloged outfits, HO, and Raceway. So we also have all the records for the cataloged outfits, and I just don't have the time, but that's the book I really want to do because people would be, it would blow people's mind on how many, all the stuff that I'm talking about in promotional outfits also applies. So they did substitutions. So in an outfit, they may have said they were going to make 5,000. Well, they would say, okay, for the first 3,000, use this engine. For the next 2,000, use this engine. So they did the same thing on the catalog outfit side. So it's amazing that, here's an example. So when I was out photographing all these promotional outfits, I was also out photographing the cataloged outfits in the 60s. And I would I'd freak out because people would invite me into their house to let me go through their collections, a huge level of trust. And, there's a lot of money involved, too, in these collections. And I was afraid I'd go to photograph a promotional outfit and not have the right piece. So I kind of built this kind of reference library of stuff I'd bring with me. If a packet was missing or an instruction sheet, I'd drop it in to make sure the picture was correct. 9 times out of 10, if I opened up somebody's promotional outfit, it was correct. It matched the production records. A couple times it didn't, but, because what happens was when people bought these promotional outfits, they didn't know what went in them. They just stuck them on the shelf. On the other side of the coin, catalog outfits. I'd be the same guy's house, go to photograph a catalog, I'll open it up. Doesn't match the production records. Why? Because a collector looked at the outfit, oh, what's this car in here? This is not the right car. The catalog says it's this. They would take that car out and put the right car in there. When there's a couple outfits in the 60s where the actual production records don't match what actually got produced because they ran out of cars. So what I'm getting at is I want to do the catalog outfit book because people be amazed at how wrong their catalog outfits really are. It's a pretty bold statement, but that's what I saw and experienced comparing them to the production records.
Interesting. Now, Project War has also published The Authoritative Guide to Post-War Operating Cars and Inside the Lionel Trains Fun Factory, The History of a Manufacturing Icon and the Place Where Childhood Dreams Are Made. And I tell you what, if you've never read any of these books, you would be amazed at the length that John and his team have gone to get it right. Let's talk about the Fun Factory for a second, and I know that we hadn't previously discussed this, but I just want to talk about this book because if you've ever wanted to know anything about the Lionel Factory, this book does it, and it does it almost to a point where you walk away from reading this book going, I don't know how I'm going to retain even an eighth of the knowledge in here, but it's really cool. Tell me about the experience of writing that book, and tell me, obviously you contributed to that book. It's not per se your book, but tell me, the process of writing that book and some of the interesting things that you guys found out about the factories as you went.
Yeah, that book, interesting story. So when I was kind of building my dream team of the top guys in the collectors community and the writing community, you just go back to all the Greenberg books. It's Paul Ambrose, Bob Osterhoff, Joe Algazzini, Manny Piazza. So when I was bugging, I got to know Bob Osterhoff really well. Because when we bought all this paperwork, it's like we didn't know what it was, and the guy who was the paper expert in the country was Bob, so we struck up a great friendship, great guy. And I kept bugging him. I said, Bob, you got to rewrite your paper book. I don't want to do that. Bob, you want to rewrite? No. So finally I changed my line of questioning and said, Bob, what do you want to write about? He goes, I want to write about the factories. I'm like, well, damn, if it was that easy, why didn't you tell me that in the first place? So we sat down, and I learned as a publisher, I was like, self-publishing is the big thing right now. It's really easy. I could take a Word document, send it to Amazon, and by tomorrow you could have that as a book either on demand or online. It's that easy to get physically books published. But I realized, so I was like, what value does a publisher bring? And then I really realized that when I was working with Joe Algazzini when he did his book and Bob when they did their book, you're kind of like, you're a master project manager, you're a psychologist, you're an editor. I did all the photography, a lot of the photography in that book. You kind of, it's like your baby. You nurture that project from start to finish. So Bob had some great ideas. We went back and forth, and we kind of honed down and said, okay, there's been great books written about, Ron Holliner's book is a phenomenal book, another great book out there called All Aboard, which is the history of, Joshua Lionel Cowan. But, Bob wanted to go deeper into what actually the factories were about from a manufacturing perspective, a history perspective, a cultural perspective. You mentioned, reading it and, trying to retain it all. It's basically like a college history text. In fact, there is a train collector that I know who does teach at college and does use the book as, an example of what it really is, Americana. If you think about what Lionel went through, it's no different than, a GE or a lot of these other companies that, started off as a small job shop in lower Manhattan. As he started growing and getting bigger, he went to more of an assembly line, and then eventually, in the 50s and 60s, you had the strikes and the labor, anything that happened in Americana, Lionel was kind of a microcosm for that. And eventually, they tried to outsource to Mexico. That didn't work well. Now they've outsourced everything overseas, which is no different than a lot of companies. It's a phenomenal story of an American success and a cultural success. So, a couple of cool things that we figured we uncovered was some of the early origins of where Lionel, when it was actually incorporated, how it was incorporated. It was kind of funny, the actual incorporation documents, the actual date on the documents, Bob actually went to the Library of Congress and actually got to see the original documents. Well, the previous versions of the documents weren't copied right, so the dates that were on there were difficult to read. Well, Bob, since he did all the primary research, that was something he uncovered was the correct date for the incorporation. Just all kinds. I could go on for hours. I mean, it's phenomenal. He went to the actual factory where the one factory that burned down. He's got a full pictorial of He's actually got pictures of the factory on fire in the book. I mean, the guy's just a phenomenal researcher.
Yeah, it's an amazing book, and if I remember correctly, one of the things that's still left is and the photograph is in the book, and this sticks out for some reason to me, the mosaic tile with the Circle L logo is still in the floor at the factory, if I'm correct. Is that right?
There's actually two still there. I just came back from York a couple weeks ago. I was talking to a couple of my buddies who've been out there numerous times. They've got pictures by the Circle L, but there's two Circle L's still on the floor out there. That is correct.
I'm waiting for somebody to get brave, and I hate to say it, but take a concrete saw in there, and that's the end of it.
Believe me, there's been offers. Unfortunately, I think structurally where they're at, you'd have to take, there's two things. You'd have to take that whole staircase to get the one, and then also I don't know what they're however they're made, the floor, you'd have to dig down really, really deep, or they would just crumble if you took them out. So it's I don't know what kind of the flooring it is. So, Derek, I've already been down that path.
I'm sure a lot of people have, and maybe it's best that those stay where they're at. There's so many pieces of history, and going off on a completely different tangent for a second, Lionel archives are a great example. There are plenty of things that were supposed to be in the archive that have mysteriously walked out of the archives over the years. Nobody knows where they've gone to, and so maybe it's good for once that something has stayed where it was put.
Yeah. I think, and change the topic a little bit, I think one of the neatest things that Bob did, and we did it in the back of the book, was we did a graphical timeline of the Fun Factory, of all the factories. So I'm actually looking at it right now because, like you said, it's hard to retain this stuff. I just go back and, really easy. In 1986 or 1896, this is where they started. And the biggest thing that, I had difficulty as a researcher and a collector and not really understanding, they had two factories at one time. They had, both Hillside and Irvington, and they were, both up and running at the same time for numerous years. And then another thing, too, is, everybody thinks, in 1967 or in 69 they got rid of the factory. Really, the original person who tried to buy it defaulted, so they really didn't get rid of the factory until 1977. So, just cool stuff that, Bob made easy to digest, I should say, So,
right, and if anybody wants one of those posters, they are available on the Project Roar website, correct?
Yeah, what we did was I took the graphics and I made it like a 12-inch by 36-inch poster, which you can go get, which is really neat because then you can just, those frames at the common size, you can go buy a frame for it. And I've got a lot of train buddies who've just framed them and put them up on their walls. It's very colorful, and it's a great piece of history.
Let's wrap it up with this question. It seems like you guys have covered quite a bit of ground with your first, few books. You've mentioned the catalog book that you would like to write. Is there enough material in that stack of papers? And if there is, what would you like to write about?
Derek, I have a list of about 15 things I'd like to do. And believe me, there's more than enough information to write about. There's just two things. It's just time and effort. So I have, out of the 15 that I have on my list, I actually have 3 in the works by my authors. So Bob Osterhoff is doing a follow-up book to The Fun Factory. Joe Agazzini is doing a follow-up book to the Lionel post-war operating cars book that he and Manny Piazza wrote. And Roger Karp is actually doing a book for me. Actually, we just sat down at York a couple weeks ago, and we're going through the drafts of it. So I've got 3 in the works. Personally, I wish I had the time to do the cataloged outfit book, and Derek, there's more than we can go crazy. So one of my roles here at Project Roar, I kind of call it as I'm like the chief librarian. A librarian hasn't read everything in the library, but if someone asks a question, they can guide you to the right spot. So I've done a lot of that too, where I've helped other authors, either as part of Project Roar or on other projects that they're working on, have asked me questions, and I've researched that as well for them. In fact, I was just helping, I'm sure you know Bruce Greenberg. Bruce Greenberg's doing a early pre-war book, 2 7/8, and he had some questions that I was able to help him out with. So that's my other hat, my librarian hat. So yes, there's a lot of stuff. Keep checking back to the website, and we'll be at York, and keep going.
Okay, for the listeners that don't have these books in their library yet, and you really, really should, where do people go to order the books?
The first place you can go is to go to our website at www.project, P-R-O-J-E-C-T, roar, R-O-A-R, like a lion.com. What I'll do for you here, Derek, as part of this podcast, if anybody calls me, at projectroar.com, our number is 630-653-7657, and mentions this podcast, I'll be more than happy to give 50% off on any of these books, through the end of the year. So.
Well, hey, there you go. That's a deal for you. And considering most of our listeners should be right in the middle of writing their Christmas list, how can you go wrong? This is the perfect thing. Tell your wife, tell your kids, this is what you want for Christmas. So head on over to projectroar.com and pick up your books, and make sure you actually call, mention the Notch 6 podcast, and John's offering you guys a great deal, so I hope you guys take advantage of it. John, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for the time, and I'm sure we'll have you back again, because I'm sure there's going to be plenty more of interesting information that comes out over the next few years as you guys get these new books out. Thanks again, John.
Derek, thank you, and once again, any day that I can sit and talk trains for 45 minutes or so is a great day.
If you want that number again, and here's the deal one more time, you receive 50% off of any of Project Roar's books. That includes the authoritative guide to Lionel Promotional Sets 1960 through 1969, Inside the Lionel Fun Factory, and the authoritative guide to Lionel Post-War Operating Cars. 50% off of any of those books if you call this phone number. It's 630-653-7657. Again, 630-653-7657. Mention that you heard this deal on the Notch 6 podcast, and they will give you 50% off of those books. And trust me, that is an amazing deal. Okay, that's it for this episode. A couple of programming notes real quick. Next month, the first ever Notch 6 Christmas Spectacular. It's going to be a good one, I promise. And then another exciting thing that I want to kind of tease here a little bit is we're going to start a new segment in January on the road to the LCCA Indianapolis Convention. And basically what's going to happen is, starting in January, I'm going to build a Notch 6 modular layout section to the LCCA standard that's going to debut at the National Convention in Indianapolis in July. So we'll kind of cover me building through the module, going through the design process, the actual building of the module, and give you my thoughts and ideas on that. Okay, that's it. Before we go, any questions, comments, email me at notch6, notchsix@gmail.com. Be sure, if you listen through iTunes or Stitcher, to leave us a review and say good things about us, because, well, we think we do a good job. So help me out and let us know. Also, be sure to sign up for the Notch 6 email list. You can do that at our website, Notch6, N-O-T-C-H, and the number 6.com. The email link to sign up is on the left-hand side. We'll use that to send out early information on the upcoming guests, and also use that to notify you as soon as the brand new episode is released. In fact, I'm going to go send an email right now. Until next time, guys, keep it in Notch 6.
Thanks for listening to Notch 6. You can find us on Facebook for all the latest news and previews of our next show. Be sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes so you'll receive the show as soon as it's posted. If you have any questions or comments, email notch6@gmail.com. That's notchsix@gmail.com. We'll see you again soon. Until then, be sure to keep it in Notch 6.